Have you ever had one of those moments where you just stop right in the middle of a mundane Tuesday?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like maybe you're staring at your inbox or you're sitting in traffic
Right.
and you look around and wonder, can I actually choose any of this?
That is the big one.
I mean, really consciously choose it? Or was I pushed along a track completely blind to the rails underneath me, just acting out a script that was handed to me decades ago?
It's a heavy thought.
It really is. And welcome to today's deep dive, where we are pointing that exact, slightly terrifying question directly at you.
Right at the listener.
Because today, our mission is to explore a fundamental diagnostic urgency that sits at the very core of the human experience.
The core of it all.
Exactly. Are you actually navigating the complex forces of causality in your life, or are you just a mechanism, a biological machine blindly acting out a fixed destiny?
It is the ultimate question of agency, isn't it?
It really is.
And what makes this particular deep dive so compelling to me is the sheer breadth of the source material we're synthesizing today. We aren't just looking at one single philosophy here.
No, we have a massive stack of sources.
We really do. We're pulling from the ancient alchemical frameworks of the Renaissance.
Specifically the Negrito stage, right?
Yes, exactly. The psychological interpretations of that stage. And then we're cross-referencing that with the pragmatic endurance of Roman Stoicism.
Which is always so grounded.
Always. And we're layering all of that over the highly structured, almost clinical psychological blueprints found in the Buddhist Dhammapada and the Bhagavad Gita.
It's quite the combination.
It is. This isn't just abstract, late-night dorm room philosophy. It's an incredibly practical, multidisciplinary manual for the mechanics of how we live, how we react, and ultimately whether we are actually free.
Exactly. And to ground this towering multidisciplinary concept, there's this arresting image from our source materials that I want to paint for you before we get into the weeds.
It's a striking visual.
It really is. It serves as a visual anchor for everything we're about to discuss today.
Let's hear it.
So imagine this. There is a serene figure sitting perfectly still, cross-legged in deep meditation.
Okay.
But the figure isn't sitting under a Bodhi tree or on a quiet mountain peak.
No, nowhere peaceful.
Right. They are positioned directly at the absolute center of this massive, imposing, metallic wheel.
Just a giant machine.
Exactly. And the wheel is made of interlocking mechanical gears. And surrounding those gears are these celestial, abstract, mechanical elements.
Like a cosmic clockwork.
Yes. There's a crescent moon, there are shifting planetary orbits, astrolabes, all grinding away around this person.
It's a profound contrast.
It's almost jarring, isn't it? The absolute untroubled stillness of the human figure in the center, and then the relentless churning machinery that surrounds them on all sides.
That image is the perfect visual metaphor for the central dilemma we are unpacking today. The machinery represents the grinding mechanics of the universe.
The gears of reality.
Right. The endless, unforgiving chain of cause and effect that governs biology, physics, society. And the meditating figure represents the human attempt to find stillness.
To carve out a sliver of agency.
Precisely. Within that turning system. It immediately brings to mind the foundational quote from the Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca that actually serves as the epigraph for our text today.
Oh, the Seneca quote. I love this one.
It's brilliant. He wrote, "Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling."
Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling.
Yeah.
That is a heavy, uncompromising way to start. But it sets the stakes so clearly.
It really does.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we want to understand what it actually means to be dragged by fate, we have to dismantle some of our most basic, tightly held assumptions about reality itself.
We have to tear down the whole framework.
We do. The text we are diving into describes the universe as crystalline.
Crystalline, yeah.
And by crystalline, it doesn't mean pretty or fragile. It means a model of reality that is completely stripped of all our conceptual overlays.
All the stories we tell ourselves.
Right. All our biases, all our emotional narratives, it's just a pure, transparent web of strict causality and conditionality.
Precisely. And to understand how we even begin to perceive that crystalline web, the text introduces a concept from alchemy called the Negrito stage.
The blackening.
Yes. Now, if we look at the ancient alchemical traditions we pulled forward today, they frame this starting point as the blackening. In literal physical alchemy, Negrito was the process of burning away the dross.
The impurities.
Right, the impurities of a base metal, until you were left with a blackened, undifferentiated mass.
But psychologically, Philosophically, the Nigredo stage is the breakdown of our illusions.
It is. It is the often painful period where we are forced to confront what the text calls conditioned reality.
Conditioned reality.
Yes, this is the complex matrix of mental and physical causality that actually animates our existence, completely stripped of the stories we tell ourselves to feel safe.
So we're talking about looking at the world without the comforting filter of our ego.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is that the text is very careful to point out that this matrix, this conditioned reality, isn't some mystical, pre-written destiny handed down from a bearded deity on a cloud.
It's not magic.
No, not at all. It is a dynamic, interdependent system. Everything happens because something else caused it to happen.
It's an unbroken mechanical chain of conditions and results.
A totally mechanical chain.
But, and this is the huge but that the text pivots on, our source material points out that the untreated, normal human mind does not actually live in that conditioned reality.
No, we absolutely don't.
We don't see the crystalline web, we don't see the gears.
We are blind to them.
Instead, we live in what the text calls apparent reality.
Apparent reality, right.
And apparent reality is basically a distorted, personalized simulation. It's a world we've unconsciously built out of our hopes, our fears, our traumas, and our social reflexes.
It's a deeply humbling realization when you really think about it.
It really is.
You walk around thinking you are interacting with the world exactly as it is, but you are actually interacting with a heavily filtered projection of the world.
A projection designed almost entirely by your own biases and biological imperatives.
Exactly.
I want to pause on the analogy the text uses for this, because it clarifies it beautifully for the listener.
The mirage analogy.
Yes, the mirage. It compares apparent reality to a mirage on a desert highway.
It's so apt.
Think about the optics of a mirage for a second.
Yeah.
When you see that shimmering water on the asphalt ahead of you, the universe isn't actively trying to trick you.
Apparent reality isn't malicious.
Exactly. It's not malicious. It's just how the light is bending through the heat waves. The physics are operating perfectly.
Mechanics are sound.
Right. And the mirage looks incredibly solid, incredibly real. You'd swear you could dive into it until you actually walk up to it, investigate it, and try to touch it.
And then what happens?
Then the solidity just vanishes. There's nothing there.
Nothing at all.
The text argues that most of us are spending our entire lives reacting to mirages. We get furiously angry at mirages. We cry over mirages. We spend our entire careers chasing mirages.
And if we apply that to the 21st century experience, it becomes even more relevant.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about the mirage of social media status.
Yes, or the concept of the corporate ladder.
Exactly. We imbue these entirely fabricated, conditioned concepts with absolute life or death solidity.
We really do.
We experience literal physiological stress over an email from a boss. We treat it as if it's a tiger in the brush.
Sweaty palms, racing heart, the whole thing.
Right. We are reacting to our own projection of what that email means for our identity rather than the reality of just pixels on a screen.
It's wild when you frame it that way.
And that brings us to a profound piece of wisdom quoted in the text from the Dhammapada, specifically verse 63.
What does that one say?
It says, "The fool who knows he is a fool is for that very reason a wise man. The fool who thinks himself wise is called a fool indeed."
Oh, wow. That is such a sharp critique of the human ego.
It really cuts to the bone.
If you think your mirage is the absolute truth, if you think you are wise to the ways of the world while completely trapped in your own simulation, you are completely immobilized by it.
You are stuck. Which raises an important question for you listening to this right now.
Yes, think about this.
How much of your daily life is spent reacting to the mirage? Think about your Tuesday morning. How often are you responding to your fear of what a situation means rather than the actual bare mechanics of the situation itself?
That's the real question.
The text insists that those who want to undertake any serious training of the mind, anyone who wants to stop being dragged by fate, must first distinguish between the map and the territory.
Apparent reality is the flawed, emotionally colored map.
Exactly. And conditioned reality is the actual neutral terrain.
Wait, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Because I can hear the listener thinking exactly what I was thinking when I first read this section. Well, if we are acknowledging this conditioned reality, this absolute crystalline web where every single cause has a specific, unavoidable effect, doesn't that just mean this so-called determinism is exactly the same thing as fate, just with a different coat of paint?
That is the classic objection.
Right. How does the material actually separate them without just splitting philosophical hairs.
Huh.
Because if the gears are turning, I'm still getting crushed by them, right?
It's the perfect question. And it does feel like splitting hairs until you look at the exact point of intervention.
Okay, lay it out for me.
The text is incredibly rigorous about separating these two concepts, and it argues that conflating them is the single biggest trap for anyone trying to wake up.
So how does it separate them operationally?
Let's break it down. Fate, in the classical sense, implies an inevitability that operates completely independent of your understanding or your intervention.
It's a top-down decree.
Exactly. The ship is going to sink, and no matter how hard you bail water, you will drown.
Right. Fate is the universe saying, this outcome is locked. Enjoy the ride, because your choices don't matter.
That's fate. Now, determinism, however, is defined strictly as lawful conditionality.
Lawful conditionality.
Right. It means that when specific conditions are present, specific results will inevitably follow. It is the pure mechanics of cause and effect. It is a bottom-up process.
Bottom up, okay.
The ship is sinking because there is a hole in the hull and water is rushing in.
Right.
If you patch the hole, the ship stops sinking. The laws of physics, the determinism, never stopped applying.
Water still flows downhill.
Exactly. But the outcome changed because a condition was altered.
Okay, I see. So under fate, you don't even bother looking for the hole in the hull because the sinking is
You
preordained.
just drown.
Right. But under determinism, you grab a bucket and some wood because the sinking is conditional.
Precisely. And this leads us to what the alchemical texts call the Albedo framework. Right. If Negrito was the blackening, the terrifying breakdown and confrontation with the mechanical gears, Albedo is the whitening. It's the dawn of insight.
The sun coming up.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how the Albedo framework redefines the very concept of liberation.
How so?
Well, liberation does not mean you get a magic pass to step outside the laws of cause and effect.
You don't become a wizard.
You don't get to levitate. You are still subject to gravity, biology, and physics. The laws remain absolutely intact. But the compulsion to act blindly within those laws does not.
That is a massive distinction.
It really is.
I want to lay out the operational differences the text provides here, because it takes this from high philosophy down to street level for the listener. Let's look at the futility of fate versus the power of conditionality.
Let's do it.
If you genuinely believe you are operating under fate, then passivity is genuinely the only logical, rational response.
Why fight the current if the waterfall is predestined?
Exactly. It breeds a kind of cosmic victimhood.
It does. But if we look at it through the lens of conditionality, everything changes.
Entirely.
Under conditionality, phenomena only arise because they have supporting factors. A fire only burns because there is oxygen, heat, and fuel.
Right.
If you identify and remove even one of those supporting factors, say you remove the fuel, the phenomenon must cease.
And there's no choice.
It has no choice but to cease because the laws of physics and causality demand it.
So think about this in the context of your own life right now. Think about a time when you felt completely, helplessly dragged by a situation.
You've all been there.
Maybe it was a toxic dynamic at your workplace or a recurring, explosive argument with a partner. Did it feel like fate?
Probably did.
Did you tell yourself, well, this is just who we are toxic together, I'm doomed to this misery? That is the mirage of fate.
The mirage of fate.
But did you ever have a moment where you stepped back and looked at the conditionality?
Where you saw the actual gears?
Yes. Where you saw, wait a minute, this massive fight only ever happens when we are both exhausted after a 10-hour workday and I immediately bring up our credit card debt.
A very specific set of conditions.
Right. The fight isn't fate. It's a fire relying on specific fuel.
So if you remove the trigger...
If you simply change the timing of the conversation to a Saturday morning after coffee, the fight ceases.
Because the conditions changed.
Exactly. That is moving from the passive victimhood of fate to the incredible mechanical leverage of conditionality.
And that realization that we have the leverage to change the conditions leads us to a deeply uncomfortable truth presented in the text.
Which is?
The illusion of autonomy.
Ah, right. This part is tough.
It is. We love to think of ourselves as fiercely independent, rational actors making free choices in a vacuum.
We really do.
But the text claims that sentient beings are, to varying degrees, obscured by something called avijja, which translates from Pali as ignorance.
But the text is really specific that this isn't ignorance in the colloquial sense.
No, not at all.
It's not like forgetting the capital of a country or not knowing how to change a tire.
Right. If we look at this through a modern systems theory lens, Avijja isn't just a lack of data, like a missing file on a hard drive.
So what is it?
It is an error in the operating system itself.
No.
It is a structural misperception of the hardware trying to convince itself it's the software.
That's a great way to put it.
It is a fundamental error in how we perceive who and what we are as a self.
A structural error.
Yes. And from this fundamental structural error, a whole cascade of misplaced desires arises. Drives for absolute security in an impermanent world. Drives for control over things we cannot control.
The endless, thirsty need for sensory validation.
Exactly. And the text makes a radical, almost offensive claim here.
Brace yourself.
It says these drives are not your free choices.
They aren't.
No, they are inherited reflexes.
Inherited reflexes. We are desperately trying to secure a self that the text argues doesn't even inherently exist in the way we think it does.
We are building a fortress to protect a ghost.
Frantically building a steel fortress to protect a ghost. And by doing that, by clinging so tightly to these defensive reflexes, we are just binding ourselves tighter and tighter to that massive mechanical wheel we talked about at the beginning.
We become the gears.
We literally become the gears.
It's the ultimate tragic irony of the human condition.
It really is.
In our desperate attempt to exercise what we think is our autonomy, by ruthlessly chasing what we want, hoarding resources, running away from what we fear, we are actually just acting out pre-programmed biological and psychological scripts.
We are puppets pulling our own strings.
Exactly. Convinced we are the puppet master.
Convinced. To bring this home, the text pulls a gorgeous quote from the Bhagavad Gita.
Oh, let's hear it.
It says, "When desire is banished, the mind is untroubled. Then all things are seen in their true light."
True light, the crystalline web.
Right. But the text then introduces this brilliant, almost devastating paradox about why it's so incredibly difficult for most of us to actually banish that desire and see things in their true light.
And it comes down to a word we hear a lot today, but used in a very different context.
Privilege.
Yes.
The trap of privilege.
Let's get into this because this is fascinating.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the paradox of the human condition is that comfort is often the very thing that keeps us entirely blind to the machine.
Comfort is blinding.
Privilege obscures the mechanism.
Wow.
Those who are shielded from immediate raw suffering, whether that's through vast wealth, exceptional physical health, or just a constant, unbroken stream of high-quality digital distractions.
The digital distractions are huge right now.
They are. People in those states rarely have a compelling reason to question the solidity of their experience.
It makes perfect sense. If your mirage is a 5-star luxury resort and the simulation is constantly handing you peeled grapes and a comfortable bed,
You're not going to complain.
you aren't exactly motivated to investigate the walls and realize they're made of cardboard. You just want to order another drink and keep the simulation running.
Exactly. When the simulation is comfortable, you don't look for the glitches. You assume the universe is naturally benevolent.
And that your autonomy is absolute. But the text points out that it is almost always those who encounter the absolute shattering limits of their control.
Through severe trauma.
Right. Through profound personal loss, a terminal diagnosis, or a total existential crisis, those are the people who are the very first to glimpse the hollowness of apparent reality.
Because the mirage literally breaks.
It shatters.
The comfortable simulation collapses under the weight of reality, and suddenly they are left standing in the desert, staring right at the grinding gears of the cosmos.
They are forced into the nigredo stage.
Right. They see the conditioned reality because the apparent reality could no longer sustain the illusion.
It's a profound extrapolation to make, and it completely reframes how we think about adversity.
It totally flips it.
We generally view suffering purely as a negative state, right?
An anomaly to be medicated or eradicated as quickly as possible?
Exactly. But from the perspective of this alchemical diagnostic, hitting the limits of your control might be the most valuable, clarifying thing that can possibly happen to you.
It's the wake-up call.
It shatters the avijja, that structural ignorance, even if just for a terrifying moment.
It forces you to realize that your so-called autonomy was a polite fiction.
A polite fiction, exactly.
So what does this all mean? Because here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a lot more hopeful for the listener.
Yes, it's not all doom and gloom.
No, the material doesn't just leave us in the dark depths of an existential crisis, realizing we are biological robots running inherited scripts on a floating rock.
That would be a bleak deep dive.
Very bleak. Instead, it pivots to the actual, practical mechanism of liberation. It tells us exactly how to hack the system.
It gives us the tools.
And the tool to pick the lock is hidden right inside our own minds.
The text asserts a harsh reality first, though.
Okay, what is it?
Most human behavior is purely instinctive. We are hit with a stimulus from the environment, and we immediately mechanically react with one of three impulses.
Attraction, aversion, or confusion?
Yes. We want it, we hate it, or we don't know what to do with it, and we panic.
Those are the big three.
And these patterns are driven entirely by deep historical conditioning, not conscious free will.
It's just a reflex.
Entirely. And until that instant reactivity is interrupted, you are locked into your karmic script. So the key, the actual mechanism of liberation, begins entirely with the capacity to interrupt.
To interrupt the cycle. And to explain this mechanism of interruption, the text brings in a piece of Greek mythology that serves as the perfect, memorable analogy.
Titans.
Yes, it compares the two states of the human mind to the Titans, Prometheus and Epimetheus.
This is such a great framework.
It really is. Now,
Yeah.
The name Epimetheus literally translates to afterthought.
Afterthought.
Right. He represents the untrained default human mind. This is all of us on our worst days, acting blindly on instinct, doing whatever our biological conditioning screams at us to do.
And only reflecting on the situation after the devastating consequences arrive.
Exactly. It's the hot flush of regret you feel 3 seconds after you hit send on a furious, bridge-burning email.
We've all sent that email.
We have. And that is Epimetheus at the wheel.
And his brother, Prometheus, whose name translates to forethought, represents the exact opposite.
Forethought.
The alchemical task laid out in our source material is to actively, rigorously cultivate this Promethean faculty.
How does the text define that faculty?
It is the ability to observe and evaluate a distinct impulse before it translates into physical or verbal action.
Before.
Yes. It is the deliberate creation of a gap, a microsecond of spaciousness between the stimulus and the response.
The text calls this the emergence of pre-thought, and it explicitly labels it the first weapon against instinct.
A weapon against instinct. I love that phrasing.
I do too, because almost all biological life on this planet operates purely on unexamined instinct.
Completely.
A dog sees a squirrel, the dog's nervous system fires, the dog chases the squirrel. It's a closed loop. It's totally statistically predictable.
And the text pulls no punches here. It says that without pre-thought, without deliberately wedging open that Promethean gap, the human animal is no freer than a moth circling a flame.
Wow.
It's a stark, almost insulting comparison.
It stings a little.
It does, but it's deeply scientifically grounded when you look at how the text redefines karma.
Let's talk about that, because karma is a loaded word.
It is. In this specific psychological framework, karma isn't some cosmic ledger of good and bad deeds tallied by a judge in the sky.
It's not a point system?
No. Karma operates as a literal physiological form of biological and psychological programming.
How does that work?
The text explains that if, in a past survival situation, say during your childhood, a specific threat profile was encoded into your nervous system, your organism will react with severe anxiety when similar patterns arise today, even if the actual physical threat is completely absent.
Let's map this directly onto the listener's life again. Let's make it real.
Okay, sure.
Say you were deeply, unfairly criticized by a parent every time you tried to speak up or show emotion as a child.
A very common experience.
Yes. Your nervous system, trying to keep you safe, encoded a very simple rule. Speaking up equals danger. Visibility equals pain.
That's the karma being encoded.
Right. Now, fast forward 25 years. You're sitting in a completely safe, collaborative corporate meeting.
You're an adult now.
You have a genuinely brilliant idea that could help the team. But as you open your mouth, your heart starts pounding, your throat tightens, and you freeze.
The karma fires.
Exactly. That isn't a mystical curse. As the text explicitly says, this is not superstition. It is the persistence of memory and trauma living in the tissue of your body.
It is biological karma.
Biological karma.
And without the capacity to interrupt that signal, without Promethean pre-thought, you will simply act out that inherited script.
You'll just stay silent.
You will stay silent exactly as your past conditioning dictates, and you will rationalize it later, playing Epimetheus.
Until these scripts are actively seen in the gap between stimulus and response, they are acted out as fate.
It feels like fate.
But developing this pre-thought, this gap, comes with a fascinating psychological catch.
This is where it gets really interesting.
The text outlines this brilliant quirk that happens when you actually start waking up and paying attention.
What happens?
As you develop pre-thought, You start noticing the scripts everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You see the machinery operating in your friends, in your family, in the news cycle, and most terrifyingly, in your own head.
You start to suspect there are deeper rules.
Yes. Deeper rules governing your life that you never consented to.
And the text says this can actually manifest during that Negredo stage as a profound sense of paranoia or a feeling of deep existential oppression.
It's the terrifying sensation of waking up from the Matrix and realizing you were strapped into a machine.
And the most vital, compassionate part of the text is how it validates this terrifying feeling.
It doesn't tell you you're crazy.
It doesn't offer toxic positivity. It doesn't say, oh, don't worry, it's all in your head, just think good thoughts.
Right.
It looks you in the eye and says, this is a valid insight. You are trapped.
You are in a machine.
You are in a machine until you learn the mechanics of the lock.
Wow.
The paranoia, the friction you are feeling is actually a sign of massive progress.
It means the mirage is thinning.
It means you are finally seeing the iron bars of the cage, which is the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for figuring out how to open the door.
You are trapped until you learn the mechanics of the lock. That genuinely gives me chills.
It's a powerful statement.
It perfectly bridges into a quote the text uses from the great mythologist Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell, yes.
The quote is, "We must be willing to let go of the life we planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us."
That fits perfectly.
Because if we are really honest with ourselves, the life we planned was probably just the script our conditioning wrote for us anyway.
It was the life the machine wanted us to live.
Exactly.
Letting go of the planned life means letting go of the false autonomy, the mirage, the ego's demand that it is in charge.
It means stepping up to the ultimate threshold of breaking the karmic script entirely.
Which brings us to the major turning point in our deep dive today.
Breaking the stream.
Breaking the stream. The source material references the highly technical Buddhist map of awakening here, specifically focusing on a threshold transition called the Sotāpanna.
The stream enterer.
Yes, which translates to the stream enterer. The Sotāpanna is the defining transition point in this entire diagnostic framework.
It's the big milestone.
Now, the text states that a stream enterer is someone who is no longer bound by fate.
But wait, it immediately demands a very careful operational definition of what that actually looks like in practice.
Very careful. Because it emphatically does not mean they are suddenly immune to misfortune.
Right, they don't get superpowers.
A stream enterer is still biology. They will still get sick, they will still experience profound physical pain, they will still lose loved ones, and they will still eventually die.
The laws of determinism and conditionality still apply completely to their cellular reality.
Completely.
So if they aren't immune to the universe, if they still get sick and experience pain, what does it practically mean to be no longer bound by fate?
That's the crux of it. The text explains it by saying the stream enterer has successfully, permanently severed two very specific psychological fetters or chains.
Okay, let's look at the first one. It's called Silabata Paramasa.
Yes.
This is defined as the attachment to empty rites, rituals, and habitual routines as sources of ultimate safety.
This is a profound structural shift in the psyche. The stream enterer no longer believes that mindlessly repeating a behavior will somehow magically save them from the chaotic reality of the universe.
Now, historically, this meant abandoning empty religious sacrifices or championing for protection, right?
Sure, historically. But in a modern context, it is so much broader. It means abandoning the magical thinking that we use to ward off anxiety.
Let's map that to the listener again.
Okay.
How often do we engage in secular rituals to create a false sense of control? Think about doom scrolling the news at 2 a.m.
Oh, doom scrolling is a perfect example.
Right. We think unconsciously that if we just consume enough information, if we just stay hypervigilant, we can protect ourselves from the chaos of the world.
We treat the news feed like a protective talisman.
Exactly. Or think about the obsessive optimization of a morning routine. The perfect ice bath, the exact right supplements, the meticulously arranged desk.
Biohacking obsession.
Yes. We tell ourselves that if we just control these variables perfectly, we can hold the underlying terror of existence at bay.
But the stream enterer sees through that.
They still might organize their desk, right?
Sure, they might enjoy an ice bath, but they don't do it with the desperate belief that it will save them from the turning of the gears.
They have abandoned the superstition of control.
Precisely. But the second fetter they sever is the real heavy hitter. It's the one that changes everything.
What's the second one?
It's called Sakayadihu,
Sakeyuti.
which translates to personality view or identity view. The text says that breaking this fetter means they no longer mistake the internal voice of fear, desire, and anxiety for myself.
This is the crux of the entire deep dive. This is the moment the lock is actually picked.
Let's really sit with this.
Let's do it. When we, as untrained minds, hear a voice in our head say, I am terrified, I am going to fail, I need to run away, or I am furiously insulted, I need to attack that person.
We implicitly, blindly believe that voice is us.
We believe it is the core of our identity speaking the absolute truth.
We do. But the stream enterer has seen through the structural misperception of selfhood we talked about earlier.
They see the glitches in the matrix.
They see that those voices, those impulses, are just echoes of past conditioning. They are weather patterns passing through the mind, not the sky itself.
Weather patterns, not the sky. I love that. And breaking that identification leads to what the text brilliantly calls functional freedom.
Functional freedom.
I emphasize functional because it's so grounded. This isn't about floating on a cloud in a state of permanent lobotomized bliss.
Not at all.
It's highly functional, applicable freedom in the real world. Listen to this distinction for a second. Instincts, preferences, and intense emotional responses still happen to this dream enterer.
Their nervous system still functions normally.
They still feel the biological flush of anger when someone cuts them off in traffic.
They still feel the icy drop of fear in their stomach.
Yes. The radical difference is entirely in their identification with the phenomenon.
The text provides a remarkably precise, almost clinical example for this, and it's something you, listening right now, can try out the next time you get triggered.
Okay, what's the example?
It is the difference between experiencing the thought, anger is arising,
Anger is arising.
which is simply observing a conditioned event, a biological reality occurring in the body, versus experiencing the thought, I am angry, therefore I must shout, which is accepting the conditioning as a command and absorbing it as an identity.
Anger is arising versus I am angry. It sounds on the surface like a mere semantic trick, a bit of wordplay.
It does, but in practice, it is the exact difference between freedom and fate.
Because the identification is broken, the behavioral loop is interrupted.
The stream enterer steps entirely out of the predictable statistical orbit of their destiny.
Let me push back gently, though, because a listener might think, well, if I don't identify with my feelings, doesn't that just make me a cold, detached robot?
A sociopath who doesn't care about anything.
Exactly. Doesn't that make me less human?
It's a common fear, but it's the exact opposite.
How so?
Think about it. When you are blindly reacting to your conditioning, that is when you are a robot.
Oh,
You are just software executing a script.
That's a great point.
By stepping back and observing the impulse anger is arising, you don't become a robot. You finally become the programmer.
You become the programmer.
You feel the anger fully, but because you aren't drowning in the identity of it, you have the spaciousness to choose a compassionate, effective response rather than a destructive, reflexive reaction.
The phenomenon of the anger lost its primary supporting factor, the factor of your identification. So the compulsion to act on it ceases.
Exactly.
That is so incredibly empowering. You are the programmer, not the software.
And this brings an elegant architectural structure to the text, as it goes on to outline specific degrees of freedom based on one's relationship to these very instincts.
Right. It categorizes a literal hierarchy of freedom, mapping out exactly where different states of consciousness sit in relation to the machine.
The text lays out a very clear table of these levels, and it's useful to walk through it because you can literally audit your own life and ask yourself where you spend most of your time.
Okay, let's walk through it.
At the bottom rung, we have the state of the worldling.
Or Patujana in Pali.
Yes. In this state, the relationship to instinct is that it is obeyed implicitly.
Implicitly obeyed.
Instinct is perceived absolutely as me. The degree of freedom here is classified as low.
Low freedom.
Your behavior is entirely statistically predictable based on your conditioning. If someone insults you, you predictably insult them back.
If you see sugar, you eat it.
You are Prometheus.
You are just reacting.
Yeah.
Now, moving up the ladder, we reach the stream enterer, or Sotāpanna, which we just spent time unpacking.
Right.
Here, the relationship to instinct changes dramatically.
Mm.
It is observed explicitly.
Observed explicitly.
Instinct is seen as foreign data, a biological weather pattern, not as self.
And the degree of freedom is classified as moderate.
The chain of reaction can be consistently broken. The Promethean gap has been established and maintained.
And then, at the top of this specific developmental table, we have the non-returner, or anagami.
Okay, what happens here?
Here, the text says the relationship to instinct shifts again. It is transmuted.
Transmuted.
Gross instincts, like deep sensual desire and visceral ill will or hatred, no longer even arise in the mind stream.
They don't even arise.
They don't even arise. The degree of freedom is high. You are free from what the text brutally calls the coarser engines of rebirth.
The coarser engine.
You've essentially uninstalled the malware from the operating system completely. The buttons are no longer there to be pushed.
Wow. If we connect this hierarchy to the bigger picture, it leads to one of the most doctrinally fascinating, almost cosmological points in the source material.
The concept of the narrow gate.
Yes, the narrow gate. And why the human experience itself, the exact life you are living right now, is considered uniquely positioned for this work.
The concept of the human realm is so interesting here.
It is. The text argues that the human realm is doctrinally unique because it perfectly, precariously balances suffering and capability.
It creates the exact right chemical environment for waking up.
To understand why, the text contrasts the human realm with what it calls lower and higher realms. Now, we don't need to look at these as literal physical places.
Right, but as varying states of consciousness that we can slip into.
Exactly. In the lower realms, states dominated by sheer survival terror, which the text compares to hells, or states of endless, unquenchable craving compared to ghosts, or dull, unreflective routine compared to animals.
What happens in those states?
The capacity for reflection is literally crushed by the immediacy of the environment.
It's a question of cognitive bandwidth.
It really is.
If you are literally running from a tiger, or if you are starving to death, or if you are trapped in a war zone, you do not have the luxury or the bandwidth to cultivate Promethean forethought.
You can't meditate while running from a tiger.
You cannot sit there and observe the gap between stimulus and response when the stimulus is a lethal threat.
The instinctual drive for physical survival overrides everything, and rightly so.
The conditions for liberation are impossible because the suffering is too acute.
And on the flip side, we have the higher realms, which the text describes as states of intense, godlike pleasure or deep, undisturbed absorption.
And the problem here is that the motivation to question reality is completely absent.
It's the trap of privilege we talked about earlier, but magnified to a cosmic extreme.
If you exist in a state of constant, uninterrupted luxury, pleasure, and ease, why would you ever look for the exit?
Why would you undergo the painful Negrito process of investigating the mirage if the mirage is constantly handing you everything you ever wanted?
You become perfectly, comfortably numb.
Which leaves the narrow gate of the human state.
A narrow gate.
The text declares that the human state provides the precise, exact amount of friction necessary for ignition.
I want to repeat that phrase because it is the thesis of the entire document. Friction is ignition.
Friction is ignition.
The human realm is the only place where instinct and insight coexist in a workable tension.
We suffer just enough to know that something is deeply wrong and to want out.
But we are capable enough and comfortable enough to actually figure out how the lock works.
It's funny, looking at it that way completely upends how I usually view a bad day. I always assumed, unconsciously, that the ultimate goal of life was to eradicate all friction, to get enough money, enough status, enough security so that nothing ever bothered me again.
That's the modern dream.
Right, to realize that the friction, the anxiety, the frustration, the moments where you feel trapped in the machine is actually the only thing capable of waking you up.
That is a massive, heavy perspective shift.
The friction isn't the enemy. It is the necessary spark.
It fundamentally changes our relationship to our own daily struggles.
It really does.
The text concludes its core argument by stating unequivocally that fate truly does govern the instincts of the unconscious.
If you are asleep, you are dragged.
But the very microsecond you develop the capacity to pause, to question, to reframe, to observe the impulse without identifying with it, a doorway opens.
And to walk through that doorway is to finally step beyond the machinery of blind causality and begin the actual conscious work of steering your own life. Stepping beyond the machinery brings us right back to where we started an hour ago.
That image of the serene figure.
Finding absolute stillness amidst the grinding, interlocking gears. We've covered incredible ground today.
We really have.
We started by dismantling the comforting mirage of apparent reality, exposing the dynamic, causal web of the crystalline universe beneath it.
We define the critical operational difference between the passive victimhood of fate and the profound mechanical leverage we gain through determinism and conditionality.
We examine the structural ignorance, the avijay, that binds us to a false sense of self.
And the paradox of how societal privilege and comfort can act as our strongest, invisible chains.
We explore the Promethean power of the gap, how developing forethought allows us to interrupt the biological karma encoded in our very nervous systems.
And finally, we looked at the massive threshold of the stream enterer, breaking the psychological fetters of superstitious ritual and personality view.
Achieving a functional freedom where instinct is observed as weather, rather than obeyed as a master.
And to anchor all of this, the text leaves us with one final, masterful piece of wisdom from the Dhammapada, verse 80.
Let's hear it.
The wise man shapes himself as the carpenter shapes wood.
As the carpenter shapes wood. I love that.
It's beautiful.
It implies profound effort. It implies intention. It implies that the raw material of your life, no matter how knotted or difficult, is workable if you have the right tools and the patience to use them.
The friction is the wood.
But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought that goes beyond just your own personal peace of mind.
A provocative thought.
Yeah, exactly. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about individual liberation, how you can pick the lock and break the stream. Consider this.
Okay.
What happens to the massive machinery of society? Our debt-driven economies, our outrage-fueled politics, our entirely reactive institutions, if a critical mass of people actually achieve this?
That's a staggering question.
If millions of people break the stream, stop reacting to the mirages of status and fear, and establish that Promethean gap, does the social machine finally break down, or does it evolve into something unrecognizable?
That is something to chew on.
Thank you for exploring this incredibly dense material with us today.
It's been a genuine privilege to unpack these mechanics with you. Keep investigating the machinery.